Right. So November 23, paper 22, the drill is the same. You have one case study. It can be a combination of micro and macro. And then you have one essay, section B, ke andar, that you have to do out of a choice of two questions, and then macro ke section C mein. So basically, the topic is one of those जो कि काफी hyped up है ever since Tesla came into the market, and it's about the EV vehicles, right? And even till today, we're talking about it. And this was sort of like 2020 की बात हो रही है, and after that. And now we know like how the Chinese have progressed and they've created their own electric vehicles like BYD, and you see it in Pakistan even. And so there has been significant progress that has been made. So this case study is something to do with that. So let's go over it. The heading tells it electric cars create challenges for oil producers. How are they linked? Obviously, it has something to do with electric cars with petrol-based cars and petrol-based cars requiring uh, oil, right? And just for information, जो major oil producing countries हैं, like you have Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, basically Middle Eastern and South American countries. Um, Petrol cars transportation is one of their biggest clientele, right? जो दुनिया में oil produce होता है उसका एक बहुत बड़ा percentage basically is used by the transportation sector. So if people are moving away from transportation, that's a big blow to the the oil producers. ठीक है? So let's go over this. It says oil companies are facing uncertainty in 2020 as the COVID-19 pandemic causes a collapse in demand for their products. But car producers are predicting the pandemic will help accelerate the use of electric vehicles. Um, Connection जो नजर आ रहा है पहली इस लाइन के अंदर, that has something to do with पैंडेमिक आने की वजह से ग्लोबल फैक्ट्रीज हैव शट डाउन. There's not much transportation that is going on, so that has probably reduced the demand for oil-based products. And फिर उन्होंने एक कनेक्शन बनाया कि जी car producers are predicting that pandemic will help accelerate the use of electric vehicles. I don't see how that is connected. कि electric cars की क्यों demand बढ़ेगी because of people staying at home. Pandemic का उसके साथ क्या ताल्लुक है? Uh, I don't see any connection, but they've made this statement. Looking ahead, cut in investment by oil companies as their revenue falls could reduce supply enough to cause a rise in oil prices. So what we're saying is कि फिर वो continue करें कि अगर electric cars की demand बढ़ती है तो obviously petrol based cars की demand गिरेगी, and that will reduce the demand for oil, and so the companies will cut down on their investments and supply will fall, prices will rise, and they're assuming that revenues is likely to fall. देखते हैं. This makes electric cars more attractive just as car producers. Okay, so they're making the link कि जब oil prices will go up, तो फिर उसका जो substitute है उसकी demand बढ़ेगी. I'm okay with this connection. Then they have a table, selected data from the oil and car industries 2014 के साथ. अगर आप देखें average real global price of oil per barrel के हिसाब से 2014 में it was very high. Okay, anything near 100 is considered a high uh, oil barrel price. ठीक है? It has gone up above 100 also in the past. Uh, but that's a really high rate. I think it's a couple of years पीछे भी जो है, it must have been on the higher side. But then it falls down. If you notice, एक साल के अंदर there's a very big reduction that has taken place in the oil prices. And this is all before pandemic, right? So 14, 15, something must have caused or triggered the oil prices to fall. 2014, 2012, the global world was in a recession. And 2014, what must have happened in 2014? I can't remember what happened in 2014, or just shy of that. So there is a chance that 2014 and before, maybe the supply was reduced, cut down because of the recession and less investment, which caused the oil prices to go up. But then definitely 2014, something must have happened, which sort of brought them back into their actual जो normal rate होता है. This is their normal rate, by the way. फिर उसके बाद it goes up a little, 2017 and 2018. Definitely there must be like a recession से हम बाहर निकले थे तो rising demand होती है. And then 1920, 20 के अंदर, this is probably because of the COVID, there was a drop in the demand for oil. I remember this. COVID के time पे basically because the world had shut down their ports because of the virus and the scare of the virus. तो हो ये रहा था कि the oil ships were moving around in the ocean, but there was no port which was willing to take that oil, right? So the ship was already in the sea looking for a port. In fact, a time came when oil prices actually went into negative. इसका क्या मतलब था? That oil companies were willing, no, what was going on? Oil companies were willing to pay countries to just take the oil off their hands. But the problem was that the countries had already stocked a lot of oil and their storages were full. So basically, they did not have space to take even when the prices went negative. ये आपकी स्टॉक मार्केट के अंदर फ्यूचर प्राइसेस होती है. That's what was going on, and the prices were really plummeting for oil. But okay, what does it have to do with our case right now? So oil prices goes down to its actual rate and then it continuously overall falls. अगर हम यहाँ से percentage निकालें तो that's going to be a very significant fall if they ask us to compare. लेकिन देखें, oil prices have fallen, but then they've gone up and then fallen. But अगर आप global sales of electric cars देखें तो it has been overall rising, right? There has never been a fall. तो अगर मैं connection देखना भी चाहूँ तो I don't see much of a connection over here. Like at least like I can't say that there is a for sure positive or a negative relationship here. फिर नीचे बढ़ते हैं. However, the rise of electric car sales could slow within the next few years due to a worldwide shortage of supply of lithium needed for car batteries. इलेक्ट्रिक कार्स की सेल क्यों कम हो रही है भाई? अगर अगर आपको बैटरीज की सप्लाई शॉर्टेज है, लिथियम लिथियम की सप्लाई शॉर्टेज है, तो डिमांड फॉर लिथियम could triple by 2025 to 1 million tons per year. We are in 2025. I think if we can Google and we can see that has it tripled or not. And then again, they're saying कि फिर वो और मजीद double again हो जाएगी to 2 million by 2030. So a typical lithium mine produces about 30,000 tons per year, which means that the market needs approximately 4 new mines per year to meet demand. लेकिन it takes about 6 years to discover a mine, develop the mine, and start extracting it. 6 साल लग जाते हैं इस प्रोसेस के अंदर. सिमिलर और प्रीटी मच ऑल माइंस के अंदर ये सिचुएशन होती है, बाय द वे, कि अगर पाकिस्तान के अंदर रिको डिक का हमने ऑयल, सॉरी, हमने गोल्ड और कॉपर माइंस को डिस्कवर किया एंड फ्रॉम डे वन व्हेन वी गेट द परमिशन टू स्टार्ट एक्सट्रैक्टिंग, इट्स गोइंग टू टेक एक्स नंबर ऑफ इयर्स. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल वी आर सेइंग 2028 विल बी द फर्स्ट ईयर जिसके अंदर हम एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं कि एक्चुअल कॉपर विल बी एक्सट्रैक्टेड फ्रॉम द माइन, राइट? तो आज 2025 है. 2023 2024 के अंदर डील हुआ था। ठीक है। Rising global sales of electric cars are impacting on on world oil producers. The boom years for the the boom years for the oil industries are over and economy starts to deal with climate change. अब ये एक और मसला है कि climate change एक problem है. People realize it, people are acting on it. Definitely that can boost the electric car sales and it can work negatively for petrostate. Petrostate कौन सी होती है? Those countries जो बहुत ज्यादा rely करती है oil and gas extractions के ऊपर. A lot of Middle Eastern and South American countries actually deal with that. अब interesting fact, by the way, for you guys to know, for life basically. ऑयल प्राइसेस जब फ्लक्चुएट करती हैं और वॉलेटाइल होती हैं तो ये जो बड़ी बड़ी रिच इकोनॉमीज हैं, जो गवर्नमेंट है, लाइक सऊदी अरब, लाइक ईरान, लाइक इराक, लाइक वेनेजुएला, इनके साथ इशू ये है कि जब ऑयल प्राइसेस 40 डॉलर्स पर बैरल से नीचे जाती है ना, तो अब उनके लिए बड़ा प्रॉब्लम हो जाता है, बिकॉज दैट मीन्स कि उनके बजट में प्रॉब्लम आता है. यू रिमेंबर व्हाट इज अ बजट? बजट इज देम मेकिंग गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग वर्सेस टैक्स रेवेन्यूज और गवर्नमेंट रेवेन्यूज. ऑयल प्राइसेस जब 40 से नीचे जाती है तो मसला ये होता है कि उनके रेवेन्यूज कम हो जाते हैं और उनके एक्सपेंडिचर्स बढ़ जाते हैं. दैट टेक्स देम इनटू द डेफिसिट की रेंज. Before that, they're making so much money that they're spending crazy amounts of money on anything. Like you've seen it in Saudi Arab's case, or Dubai's case, or Abu Dhabi's case, that they make so much money. You know, if they were making like 90 or 48, they're making reasonable money to do a lot of investments on all sorts of projects, like crazy projects like the Line City and things like that. But once the dollar comes down below 40, they are cash strapped. Now they have difficulties and their national debt starts to go up. So it's not in their favor. That's why they all get together and then they try to increase the price of oil again. So obviously they need some sort of turmoil for that price to go up. Otherwise, अगर आप stability देंगे तो automatically those prices will go down. You understand that? So a lot of these दुनिया में जो एकदम से out of ordinary problems create हो जाती हैं and oil price starts to jump up, there is something fishy in this whole thing. Now, Venezuela offers a cautionary tale. Venezuela, South America के अंदर है, and it is also one of a very developing economy, troubled economy, but it's a very oil-rich economy where you have a little small elite which makes crazy amount of money, but the whole country is in deep trouble, basically. Serious management has caused its oil production in 2020 to drop to about 10% of its 2000 level. Uh, तो अब ऐसी सिचुएशन के अंदर obviously the GDP has fallen by more than 75% in the last 5 years and more than 5 million people have left the country. So there must be a serious brain drain. अच्छा, सिर्फ brain drain नहीं होता कि आपके पढ़े लिखे लोग चले जाते हैं. It's quite possible that the rich and the elite of your country, जो आपके rich oil ओलिगार्क्स होते हैं, जो पैसा वाला लोग बंदा होता है, जो आपकी कंट्री में इन्वेस्टमेंट्स भी करते हैं, these people are also leaving. All right, so that's a big problem. The solution is diversification. We've seen that happen in Middle East, that how Middle East के अंदर Oman and Saudi Arab are investing in renewable energy and international tourism. If you notice in the last 5 years, we've seen Saudi Arab and Middle Eastern countries really stepping up their game on the renewable energy. Actually, so much so that they've become a forefront of that. And that's basically getting ahead of the problem that they saw, right? So that is, you can give credit of that to MBS, the Mohammed bin Salman, that he took initiatives to move in that direction specifically, right? But Venezuela has not been able to do that. So for them, it's sort of like they have to uh, start this whole thing, but their infrastructure is really bad. But they were very proactive, the Middle Eastern. Attempts at changing by less wealthy petrostates such as Venezuela has hampered by a lack of capital at home and because they are often unable to attract Western investors. So as a result, they tend to focus on short-term rather than long-term economic growth. So ultimately, many petrostates are likely to need outside support to diversify their economies in addition to financial aid. Now, when I hear financial aid, I hear trouble. It is suggested that wealthy countries should also offer technical assistance, such as retraining the workers and designing new tax systems and support with adaptation of renewable energy. So, this is your case study taken from various sources 2020, 2021, and then year 2023 का आपका examination है. I think it's a good one, but I think it is a complicated one. It's not an easy case study. पहला क्वेश्चन वो देते हैं यूजिंग द डेटा इन टेबल 1.1 कैलकुलेट द परसेंटेज चेंज इन द एवरेज रियल ग्लोबल प्राइस ऑफ ऑयल बिटवीन 2014 एंड 20 14 से 20 का कितना बड़ा परसेंटेज चेंज आया है यू टेक 93.2 and you take 2020 का okay so let's do this 39.7 new minus old divided by old into 100, right? So you do the calculation and you're gonna get a number. It's more than 50%, so it's about 40 over 60, negative 57.4 to be precise. You can round it up, you can round it down. They'll accept anywhere from 57 to 58. They always do. But I would always recommend कि जो calculator ने निकाला है ना, just keep that. And I think answer भी negative में आएगा. So if you write negative 57.4, you get fourth mark. Or if you can even write like the percentage of the real global prices falls or decreases by 57.4%, you're in the okay. Okay? तो ये आपका हो गया पहला मार्क पहले दो मार्क इनफैक्ट for calculation. Explain why the price of oil on the world's market fell in 2020. Why did it fall in 2020? कुछ ना कुछ लिखा हुआ है. So there are a couple of things that is mentioned. एक तो कोविड की वजह से there's a collapse in the demand for their products. एक reason ये है. We just have to write one reason and you explain it. Or there is a rising demand for electric cars. ये भी ठीक है. लेकिन मेरी नजर में pandemic is a better one. But make sure that based on the question में क्या बोला है? Why the price of oil has fallen, right? So make sure whatever you use, you make sure that you explain the link कि oil prices कैसे गिरी. So when there is COVID-19, the demand for the oil products have fallen, which has led to the demand for oil to fall. And when that happens, the price of oil is going to fall. Please make sure that you make the whole link and till the end, के price कैसे गिरेगी, you make sure you make the connection, right? Even for 1 mark. एक reason तुमको मिल जाएगा for whatever reason you're suggesting. Article में दो reasons दिए हुए हैं. There's rising demand for electric vehicles, and the second one is this. ठीक है. उसके बाद सी पर आते हैं. With the help of a diagram, explain why supply problem referred to may lead to an increase in the price of electric cars in the future. And consider, so counter karna hai, and consider policies that may be used to overcome this supply problem. Okay, how do you answer this one? डायग्राम मांगा है तो डायग्राम तो देना लाजिम है. We can keep up to 1 mark. Worst case, 1 mark तुम्हें डायग्राम के मिल जाने चाहिए, which shows that the price for electric cars is going to rise. And जो पॉलिसी उन्होंने सजेस्ट करनी है, अच्छा, जस्ट बी केयरफुल कि जो तुम पॉलिसी सजेस्ट करोगे, that should deal with the problem that they've mentioned. So, for example, in the article, they mentioned over here that the price, the rise of electric sales could slow down because of the lithium ka issue, and the lithium की वजह से the supply. Okay, so this is what we're doing. This is what I would have done. I would have made a diagram, the demand and supply ka diagram. Okay, quantity, price, demand, supply, and I would have suggested कि देखिए जी, because the price of, sorry, the lithium supply has reduced, which will cause the price of lithium to go up. And when that happens, the cost of production for electric cars is going to rise, and that will cause the price of lithium, that will cause the price of electric cars to rise, and it's going to cause a contraction in demand for electric vehicles. Contraction. Yeah, here I would mention that there is a movement along the demand curve. Because you know what, ये आजकल डायग्राम में ना, आजकल, पहले मार्किंग स्कीम में हो सकता है नहीं हो, लेकिन आजकल बड़ा ये लोग इसको देख रहे हैं. तो मेक श्योर दैट यू डू मेंशन दैट. तो ये डायग्राम हो गया. इसकी रीजनिंग के अंदर आई वुड से दैट यू मस्ट मेंशन about the whole shortage of lithium. Okay, shortage of lithium, and that's sort of like increasing the cost of production that leads to a fall in the supply and rise in the price of it. Yeah, so मेरे ख्याल के अंदर this would be one essential thing that needs to be done. And then consider one policy that might be used to overcome this challenge. तो जो पॉलिसी सजेशन है वो होना चाहिए इस मसले का हल, शॉर्टेज ऑफ लिथियम. So you could suggest some sort of subsidy, that can do like research and development towards the lithium and how you can increase the supply of lithium, right? Or maybe like investments in training that can somehow increase the productivity of lithium, but it has to do with lithium, nothing else. All right. Anything else will not be considered. So it needs to be some lithium related. ठीक है. या आई गेस इससे ज्यादा तो मार्क मुझे नहीं नजर आ रहा कि कुछ हो सकता है. लेट मी go over the marking scheme with you for a second. So, the shortage of lithium may cause the fall in the supply or an increase in its demand. What? The price will rise. I don't know why they would say an increase in demand. So, for an accurate supply and demand diagram showing electric price, yeah, so whatever we did in the diagram, they're willing to give you up to 3 marks for the diagram and its explanation. And then if an accurate diagram is illustrated to increase the price without reference to price of lithium, you don't write about price of lithium because of the shortage and its price going up and connecting it to the cost of production, you're really not getting so many marks. That's the diagram का basically एक ही mark है. फिर उसके बाद they want you to write the consideration of one of the policies. तो या तो टैक्स कम कर दो या सब्सिडीज बढ़ा दो on the companies that are producing lithium so they can invest on R&D या उसके कोई alternative raw material या mines को encourage करने में some sort of, so this is what they are suggesting, right? तो ये ही इसके अंदर, और तो कुछ मुझे नजर आ नहीं रहा कुछ खास, right? ठीक. When you say supply side policy usually deals with overall economy, aggregate supply, right? So उसके अंदर absolutely we're not saying that के lithium में ही इजाफा आएगा, right? Supply side policy is very general policy. This is microeconomics. So rather than talking about supply side policy in the sense of those जो हम लॉन्ग रन के लिए यूज करते हैं मैक्रो के केस में खास तौर पे, let's distance ourselves a little more and bring it down and narrow it down to the micro aspect, which is directly हम कंपनीज को सब्सिडी दे रहे हैं या इनडायरेक्ट टैक्सेस में कुछ छूट दे रहे हैं या डायरेक्ट टैक्सेस में भी, लेकिन specifically companies which are involved in the lithium. ठीक है? So that's what we're doing. So I think this is where the questions and their troubles start. फिर आ जाते हैं नंबर डी के ऊपर. Explain whether unemployment caused by diversification of petrospace away from oil and gas production is likely to be cyclical or structural in nature, and consider which type of unemployment is likely to be more damaging to these economies. 6 mark. Breakdown क्या है? Up to 3 mark structural के लिए, up to 3 mark, 3 भी नहीं, I think 2 रखते हैं. 2 marks for structural, 2 marks for cyclical, and then 2 marks for evaluation if one is more damaging the other. लेकिन making sure that we do connect कि ये जो diversification हो रही है away from petro state is more of a structural issue. स्ट्रक्चरल अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट कब होती है? जब आपकी कोई सर्टेन इंडस्ट्रीज में चेंज हो रहा होता है एंड देयर इज अ मिसमैच बिटवीन द वर्कर एंड द जॉब और द इंडस्ट्री. सिक्लिकल हमें पता है कि ओवरऑल इकोनॉमी में डिमांड डेफिशिएंसी है, दैट मींस योर ओवरऑल एग्रीगेट डिमांड इज फॉलिंग, राइट? अब फॉरेन पेट्रो स्टेट जो हाईली डिपेंड करते हैं ऑन बेसिकली द पेट्रो डॉलर, तो फिर वो स्पेंड करते हैं आपकी इकोनॉमी के अंदर. सो इफ देर इज अ फॉलिंग डिमांड फॉर पेट्रो या पेट्रो डॉलर ऑयल की, तो ऑब्वियसली दे गेटिंग लेस मनी एंड दैट माइट cause a cyclical demand also. But more I see is the structural issue here. So I would argue, and then which one's more damaging would be my final argument here. So based on the marking scheme, I think they will agree with what I had to say, but let me see how they've done the breakdown for a second. Up to 4 marks for an explanation or an analysis कि जो भी unemployment होगी is likely to be structural, and why? For analysis and comparison of the problem caused by both cyclical and structural, maximum of 2 if only one type of unemployment is considered. Please start talking about both sides. I know there are people here and around, and people who will be seeing these lectures later on. Start comparing policies. All right. Most of the cases you do have to compare the two. And then 2 marks for an evaluation that which might be more damaging. So let me give you sort of like one example of it. Okay. So let's take a look at it. From my point of view, you know, जो petrol state से if you're moving away like oil and gas is likely to be structural. स्ट्रक्चरल क्यों है? बिकॉज मुझे पता है कि जो सर्टेन वर्कर्स हैं आपके जो ऑयल और गैस इंडस्ट्री में इन्वॉल्व हैं वो अब नो लॉन्गर मैच करेंगे विद द टाइप्स ऑफ जॉब्स अवेलेबल लाइक वी जस्ट मेंशन। मैंने सॉर्ट ऑफ क्या किया है, आर्टिकल को यूज करते हुए स्ट्रक्चरल की डेफिनेशन को सॉर्ट ऑफ मेंशन कर दिया है। लाइक ऑयल वर्कर्स कांट इजीली स्विच टू वर्क इन टूरिज्म एंड रिन्यूएबल, राइट? बिकॉज आर्टिकल में इसके बारे में लिखा हुआ है। फिर उसके बाद structural unemployment is usually more damaging than cyclical unemployment. That's a big statement I'm making, but I have a reason for it. स्ट्रक्चरल अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट के अंदर आपकी एक सर्टेन इंडस्ट्रीज परमानेंटली डिसअपियर हो जाती हैं। दैट मीन्स दोज वर्कर्स आर नॉट गोइंग बैक टू वर्क इफ द इकोनॉमी फ्लरिशेस अगेन। You're done with those industries and now new industries are coming. So this is much more permanent. Okay. But you can train people and move them away from that problem. But again, we know that it takes time for people to retrain and it takes money and effort also. Cyclical unemployment happens when spending in the economy falls. Yeah, AD ke andar there is a drop, and this usually happens in the time of recession. Once the economy picks up, those jobs come back. But the structural unemployment jobs are lost because the economy itself is structurally changing. And many workers can't find new jobs without learning new skills. We have studied this in the past that हमने कहा cyclical बहुत problematic है. I can still say that because what unfortunately it does is it doesn't affect one industry, it affects all industries all across. So the numbers are pretty big. But once you fix the economy with expansionary policy, the problem goes away. Unless you want to talk about the problem of hysteresis, which I would want you to talk about over here, because we argue on both sides. You remember that? Hysteresis का concept क्या था? That when you do like expansionary policies and AD increases, everyone's not going to get their jobs back because sometimes firms take time to start hiring people or firms may jump towards more technology coming out of recession. So people might not necessarily get their jobs back. Anyhow, so for petrol state, this is a big problem because a lot of their workers are trained only for oil and gas industries, and it may take long time and a lot of money to train people. And these countries may already be struggling with debt and low government income because of low oil prices. So while both of unemployment are harmful, structural unemployment is likely to be worse for petro states. It causes long-term problems like lower wages, high poverty, and lower economic growth unless governments make major changes to their economies. Right? So have we answered the question? The question was ये जो डाइवर्सिफिकेशन हो रही है वो सिक्लिकल है लाइकली या स्ट्रक्चरल है? आई थिंक वी डिड टॉक अबाउट दैट कि स्ट्रक्चरल क्या होता है, सिक्लिकल क्या होता है। यहाँ जो हम देख रहे हैं वो ज्यादा स्ट्रक्चरल दिख रहा है, कम सिक्लिकल दिख रहा है। कौन सा ज्यादा डैमेजिंग है? वी मेंशन्ड one seems to be more damaging for petrol. So I think we've answered our question in a very systematic way. Please do read the questions over and over and over again, understand the question more because we are checking your English language skills कि तुम क्वेश्चन को सही समझते हो कि नहीं समझते हो. And undoubtedly what I can tell you is that examiners also have disputes over this when they are going over the marking scheme before your papers before making the marking scheme. that this is what we understood, but then there are other teachers all across who says, oh, but we understood this by the question. They do factor that little bit, but mostly they're rigid in their concept. So, too bad. You have to deal with it. So make sure कि तुम अपने question के skills, उसकी understanding, उसकी निटी ग्रिटीज को समझो सवाल की कि एग्जैक्टली वो क्या चीज तक और टारगेट कर रहे हैं. And that brings us to the next question, which is assess whether diversification is likely to be more successful in Venezuela or Saudi Arab as they reduce their dependence on oil production. तो आर्टिकल के अंदर बड़ी अच्छी इंफॉर्मेशन दी है एंड आई थिंक वी नीड बिकॉज दे मेंशन दिस वी हैव टू टॉक अबाउट इट. तो आर्टिकल के अंदर काफी रीजनेबल आपको ये डिस्कशन दिया हुआ है. सऊदी अरब के बारे में उन्होंने आपको बता दिया है कि जी सऊदी अरब हैज बीन इन्वेस्टिंग इन रिन्यूएबल एंड टूरिज्म. They've already taken steps to move away. So it looks like that they might not have so much trouble. But if the price falls below 40, they have deficit issues, they have national debt issues, but at least they have work towards the alternatives and they can see the trend. Venezuela, on the other side, they are poor, they have debt issues, and they haven't even taken the first step. So, developing countries, ke andar, obviously, there are challenges when you are moving away from the dependency. In the short run, you do take a hit, but for the greater good in the long run. राइट. तो ये हमारा ओवरऑल एक आंसर का स्ट्रक्चर होना चाहिए कि यू राइट अबाउट सऊदी अरब अ लिटिल एंड कन्विंसिंग and you do write about Venezuela. Make sure you don't do one-sided. You make a comparison. Understood? 3 marks for valid analysis for Venezuela, 3 marks for valid analysis of Saudi Arab. Obviously, you can't get more than 4 marks for discussing the two. तो अगर तुमने किसी एक साइड को बहुत अच्छे से डिस्कस किया है दूसरे को माइल्डली you might get your 4 marks because you have gotten enough, right? If the answer is just a generalized discussion, if you're not talking about Venezuela and Saudi Arab, I don't see these words. I will simply, even if you have done a phenomenal job and you haven't mentioned the countries, I give you 1 mark. Easy mark for the examiner, easy money for us. And then up to 2 marks for evaluation, where we want to talk about who's more successful. Obviously, I know the answer. Saudi Arabia is much more, and we will be making the conclusive discussion on it. So I've made a little answer on that. Discussion is likely to be more successful in Saudi Arabia than in Venezuela. I'm starting with क्या कहते हैं? I should not be doing that. I usually avoid doing that, right? But let's work with that. Saudi Arabia is a wealthy country with lots of access to internal and external capital. It has already started investing in these companies, as we mentioned, and they're obviously serious about moving away from oil. They have strategies in place. Because because it has money and government support for these new projects, it's likely that they might work out. Venezuela are already shrinking. They already have a lot of people leaving the country. They are struggling. Short term में problem है, long term में compromise हो रहा है. Diversification is most likely to succeed in Saudi Arab because of the overall situation and how Venezuela is not doing so well in it. So, in conclusion, Saudi Arab will be able to move a lot better. You understand? So, this is how this case is going to be. I think this case was relatively difficult. How are we able to identify जब आप आर्टिकल पढ़ते हैं ना कि माइक्रो है कि मैक्रो है, there are some giveaways. Giveaways are when they're talking about a specific industry or a product, we know that it's a micro discussion. Okay? But if अच्छा, ऑल्सो जो आपके यहाँ पे क्वेश्चंस होते हैं उसके अंदर दे टॉक अबाउट विद द हेल्प ऑफ ए डायग्राम द सप्लाई इलेक्ट्रिक कार्स, दैट्स लाइक अ प्रोडक्ट और उसके ऊपर है, राइट? व्हेन दे वांट टू टॉक अबाउट, अगर वो चाहते हैं तो वो हो सकता है, अगर थोड़ा मैक्रो साइड पे जाना चाहते हैं तो दे वुड हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट एडीएएस डायग्राम, दे वुड हैव मेंशन्ड दैट and how it would affect the macroeconomic aims and things like that, rather than focus on a specific industry. ठीक है? तो जब वो ओवरऑल इकोनॉमी, लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल दिस इज अ मैक्रो क्वेश्चन, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट स्ट्रक्चरल सिक्लिकल की बात कर रहे हैं एंड डैमेजिंग टू इकोनॉमीज की बात कर रहे हैं, सो इट्स मोर ऑन द मैक्रो साइड, यू अंडरस्टैंड? तो इस तरह से यू हैव गिव अवेज कि ये इंडिविजुअल कंज्यूमर प्रोड्यूसर, एक स्पेसिफिक प्रोडक्ट या इंडस्ट्री की बात हो रही है या ओवरऑल इकोनॉमी की बात हो रही है, एंड दैट इज योर गिव अवे फॉर इट। ठीक हो गया? लेट्स पॉज फॉर अ मिनट। All right, so we'll do one strategy over here. We'll look at the question paper and then let's go over the micro side, a quick overview as to which question can be attempted and what might be the requirement, because this is exactly what you're going to be doing also. So let me see. With the help of a formula, explain what is meant by the term price elasticity of demand for a product and consider the extent to which it allows entrepreneurs to determine the effect of price changes on the total expenditure of their product. I think we've done this question way too many times. Um, should be an easy one, but I see one catch in this question, which I will be extra cautious of when I'm writing my answer. Here, part B, obviously, I have to also see because you don't want to get like good 6 to 8 marks in the first part and then really tank the other one. Assess whether the price elasticity of supply or cross elasticity of demand will be more useful to a business wanting to increase its total sales in a growing economy. I know most of you have already done this question with me, but there are a few elements in this question that you really want to consider when you are answering the question. So I think 2A be a tough question, but let's take a look at 2B. With the help of examples, explain the difference between free good and public good, and consider the view that public goods can never be provided in a market economy. I need to think of something that maybe it can in a market economy for my counter argument. Otherwise, so the whole free rider drill and all of that. Cheek? Okay, so even this is a very good question. I think case study may, if people did not get good marks, they probably did pretty decent with this one. फिर उसके बाद part B, a provision of merit and demerit good differs from the provision of private goods. Aren't merit and demerit goods the same as private goods? But I guess you know what we're talking about over here. Assess the view that the consequence of imperfect information are more serious in a market economy than in a mixed economy. Imperfect information, right? While making a comparison with a discussion about the seriousness for your evaluative statement. Part B of this one is a bit more complicated as compared to the Uperwala because you must have done plenty of practice for that. Okay, जी. फिर उसके बाद I think most of the kids, overwhelming amount of kids will go for question number 2, but it's not going to be as overwhelming as usually क्या होता है, बिल्कुल ही like 95 to a 5% का फर्क होता है, but this one's not gonna be like that. This one's gonna be like 60-40% का ratio in my opinion. ठीक है? Favoring more to question 2 than 3. फिर उसके बाद जब हम मैक्रो के अंदर आते हैं तो मैक्रो के अंदर दो क्वेश्चंस हैं. एक्सप्लेन द डिफरेंस बिटवीन द टर्म्स ऑफ ट्रेड एंड द बैलेंस ऑफ ट्रेड इन गुड्स एंड consider whether an economy should be more concerned about its term of trade than its balance of trade in goods. Okay, it is a tough question, but I think we've prepped up recently. Assess whether a rise or a fall in the term of trade will benefit the macroeconomic performance of an open economy that is heavily dependent. Again, they have given, I think if you get starting के कुछ questions थे year के, they've been, you know, very carefully suggesting scenarios, which is important for you to discuss while you're writing your analysis and evaluation. Five is with the help of a diagram. Your diagrams explain one reason for an increase in aggregate demand and one reason for increase in aggregate supply, and consider whether an increase will lead to inflation. I think overwhelming kids are going to do this. This is one of those questions where you will see like an 90-10 ratio. Assess whether the internal effects of inflation are more serious than the external effects of inflation for an economy. As easy 5B looks, I know that the kids are not writing a very good answer for this one, but you guys will, since you've been trying to understand that analysis means you have to write off the both sides. Like, for example, you are writing about the internal effects, both sides of the argument, external effects when it is serious and when it's not serious, and then making a final evaluative statement that which one's going to be more serious. You have to create a scenario where you might talk about in terms of like say open economy versus closed economy, the degree, and that can really make a difference. So let's move on. So जहां तक question number 2 की बात है, let me take the questions separately on the side and let's talk about it for a minute. You know the drill, right? Uh, it's a simple 3-3-2. Knowledge and understanding. What do you need knowledge and understanding for? With the help of a formula, explain what is meant by the term price elasticity of demand for a product. ओके सो पहले क्या एक्सप्लेन करना है 3 मार्क के लिए पीडी क्या होता है पीडी का फॉर्मूला क्या होता है इलास्टिसिटीज को डिस्कस कर सकते हो so that is what the first 3 marks is about okay PED क्या होता है PD measures the responsiveness in quantity demanded due to change in price. The formula is percentage. You don't leave out this percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. Then you suggest elastic versus inelastic, greater than one, less than one, percentage change in quantity is bigger than the percentage change in price. All of that, your regular stuff that we talk about. Yeah, so let's take a look at it. I have a response for you, a little bit of a response. क्या कर सकते हैं हम इसके लिए? PD measures the responsiveness in quantity demanded due to change in price. Here एक formula नहा लिखना is a serious loss for you. You have to write the formula. It can be in words also, by the way. Okay, but usually prefer this one. If it's greater than one, that means it's price elastic, which means quantity demanded change is greater than the quantity price ka change. If it's less than one, then it's inelastic. That means it's a smaller change, right? So it's the same thing. अब आपने expenditure की बात करनी है. Let me take you back to the question. The question says, consider the extent to which it allows entrepreneur to determine the effect of price changes on the expenditure. Normally, the question that we've done is how the producer can use this information to obviously increase their revenue. You remember that? So उसमें your idea was कि inelastic में let's propose a price hike or elastic के अंदर let's propose a price fall. But this is not what the question is. They're saying effect of price changes. Okay. And it allows the entrepreneur to determine, it's not saying useful or on any of that. That means what I'm trying to say here is your answer should factor in PED greater than one, PED less than one, price rise or price fall impact on the total expenditure, price rise or price fall impact on the total expenditure. You understand? This is your analysis. I will be looking when I'm reading your answer for your analysis for 3 marks. I will be looking at it in this way. Did you miss out on something? Price rise, price fall, greater than one, लिख लिया है. Price rise, price fall, inelastic, impact correctly लिख लिया है. You write 1, 2, 3, you miss out on this. I take away 1 mark, right? You write all three, you take away this, I cut 1 mark. So sort of like this. So it's more about if you've written everything or not. You understand me? तो ये इस तरह से मैं एनालिसिस को चेक करूंगा. Will be interested in cutting mark rather than giving you a mark for it. ठीक है. So in fact यहाँ पे खास उन्होंने नोट भी दिया है. So as the question refers to the price changes, it is expected that the answer should consider both price rise and price decrease. If either of the part analysis only considers a price rise or fall, then a maximum of 1 mark. They're even being more brutal, by the way. If both part of the analysis considered a price rise or a fall, then a maximum of 2 marks can be allowed. Okay, G. So we don't want to miss out on anything. We want to make sure that we write every single thing. Okay. Here, once you've done this, what do we have to analyze? Consider the extent to which it allows the entrepreneur to determine. So, मेरा जो final evaluation होगा, in the evaluation, obviously, I have to talk about the limitations of price elasticity of demand, where I can talk about that it might be more time consuming, relying on only one for PED for expenditure might be too naive. You might want to consider more things. There can be accuracy issues, calculation issues, things like that. तो ये आपका 2 मार्क का evaluation है. थोड़ा सा एक minor सा मैं evaluation दे रहा हूँ. So that's this. However, PED's usefulness, it does have some limits. It's assumed that other factors influencing demand remains constant. The whole citrus variables that only price can change. What about the other things like normal, inferior type, income, price of substitute, complements? All of those matters, right? Which may not always be realistic. Additionally, it can be difficult for entrepreneurs to calculate PED accurately. इस साल का PED might not apply to the next year's PED. Yes, when you ask कि क्या revenue is the same thing as the expenditure, it is absolutely the same thing. But अगर वो expenditure की बात करें तो think in terms of expenditure. If they're talking in terms of revenue, although they both mean the same thing, right? So overall, हम क्या कह रहे हैं? Overall, PD can be a useful for any kind of changes and production, but it should not be the sole ये मेरा conclusion है, right? So this would be my evaluation and this would be my conclusion. Please in evaluation, in conclusion, आदत डालो, लेकिन ये आदत बेकार हो जाएगी अगर ऊपर तुमने requirement पूरी नहीं की है, which is talking about the price changes in this case. All right, simple सा question था. Let's move on to 2B. 2B के ऊपर जब हम देखते हैं तो 2B is one of those questions which I feel that we've been doing it in the past quite a few times now. Assess whether the concept of price elasticity of supply or cross elasticity of demand will be more useful. Same concept. देखो इस साल भी ये आता है नहीं आता, we never know, but we want to make sure that we understand how to write about these. They can still mix elasticity के concepts. If you remember, the answer is broken down into 8 and 4. 8 के अंदर यू हैव लेवल 1, लेवल 2, लेवल 3। आई वॉन्ट यू टू मेक श्योर कि तुम अपने आप को क्वालिफाई करो लेवल 3 के लिए। What do you need to qualify for a level 3? बल्कि what do you need to qualify for level 1? Now, this might be, maybe not, but you do write this. Give me a little information of price velocity of supply. It measures the responsiveness in quantity supplied due to change in price. If the response in quantity is greater than the change in price, it's elastic. If the response is less, it's inelastic. Okay? Then you do mention cross elasticity of demand. वो क्या होता है? Cross elasticity of demand uh, measures the responsiveness in percentage change in quantity demanded for good A due to change in the price of good B. It looks at the substitutes and the complements, right? You might get a mark for it. Again, ये तो मैं बता सकता हूँ ना एग्जामिनर बता सकता है जब तक वो मार्किंग स्कीम नहीं बनाते हैं. In the recent case studies, they have given you a mark or two just to explain these correctly. Okay? But the main question is about the usefulness. अब पीईएस की यूजफुलनेस की जब हम बात करते हैं तो रिमेंबर पीईएस का यूजेज क्या है और व्हाट आर द फैक्टर्स दैट अफेक्ट इट. अगर मुझे पीईएस की नॉलेज पता है तो मैं अपने स्टॉक्स को मैनेज कर सकता हूं या अपनी प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस को मैनेज कर सकता हूं इन सच अ वे that in times of a rising demand, I can really take advantage and make good money. That's my purpose. If my good is inelastic, I know that if the price goes up, I won't be able to sell a lot. I won't be able to capture market share. I might make revenues, but not capture the market share. So I'm going to work on how I can increase my stock capacity. Or if my product is inelastic because it takes too much time for me to make production or cut down on the time it takes to produce something, I want to spend money and investments in figuring out how I can take less time so again I can take advantage. Okay. But PES has its problem. Okay. It's not always that I will be able to change the elasticities of my goods. For example, agriculture में हो सकता है perishable goods में stock रखना might be difficult without hurting the quality. Quite possible. Manufactured के अंदर usually it's much more possible, right? मैं अब क्या कर रहा हूँ मैं इसकी counter दे रहा हूँ कि maybe you can't change the price elasticity of supply, okay? Or maybe there can be some data accuracy or it might be difficult to calculate. फिर मैं क्रॉस वेलोसिटी ऑफ डिमांड की लेवल, अब ये मैं लेवल 2 पे आ गया हूँ, राइट? लेवल 2 पे आ गया हूँ बिकॉज आई टॉक्ड अबाउट बोथ साइड. अब मैं क्रॉस वेलोसिटी ऑफ डिमांड की यूजफुलनेस की बात कर सकता हूँ. एंड यूजुअली जो यूजफुलनेस की हम बात करते हैं इट्स मोस्टली इन टर्म्स ऑफ द राइवल डिसीजन. क्योंकि आपको पता है क्रॉस वेलोसिटी जो है वो सब्स्टिट्यूट्स एंड कॉम्प्लीमेंट्स की बात करता है. तो मेरे सब्स्टिट्यूट्स ने राइवल्स ने अगर कोई प्राइसिंग स्ट्रैटेजी की है तो मैं उसको कैसे रिस्पॉन्स दूंगा. दैट्स अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग एंड इट कैन हेल्प मी मेक स्ट्रैटेजी फॉर माय फ्यूचर रेवेन्यू, राइट? शॉर्ट टर्म लॉन्ग रन जो भी स्ट्रैटेजीज की बात कर रहे हैं दैट वुड बी द यूजफुलनेस. But then I want to make a counter argument that again, just looking at cross velocity of demand might not be a very good. And plus, you know what, जो substitute जो आपका rival का decision होता है, that does not give you much time to figure out कि आपकी क्या cross velocities है. You're relying on your competitor's decision, and then you don't have something जैसे पीडी और पीएस के अंदर you know your capacity, you know how consumers response to your demand was. But राइवल नया प्रोडक्ट लेकर आ जाता है, राइवल कोई मार्केटिंग गिमिक करता है, राइवल कुछ एक्सपेंशन करता है, कोई प्राइस में स्ट्रेटेजी करता है. That sort of like catches you off guard. So you don't really have good data to work on that. So ये मैंने अब limitation बात कर दी. That gives me a good level 3 high mark. You miss out on any one of this, you're gonna get level 3 lower side. You miss one side, you don't get more than level 2. When I say one side, that means you've only talked about the usefulness. For level three, you must write the counter argument. Okay? For both. And then your final evaluation should be a comparison कि PES versus cross के अंदर ज्यादा कौन सा यूजफुलनेस है. So based on the discussion that you've done, let me suggest one for you. Okay. So for an extended evaluation, while both PES and cross velocity of demand can be a useful information with the business who aims to increase the sale in a growing economy. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm bringing in the question के अंदर जो वो key things थी जो मैंने highlight किया था. तो एक अगर इकोनॉमी ग्रो कर रही है, ओके, तो उस ग्रोइंग इकोनॉमी के अंदर वन ऑफ द रीजन आई एम राइटिंग हियर. So one reason is that in a growing economy, competition tends to intensify and you want to expand your business, right? So what you should be able to do is that if your rival is making any decisions, you should be up there instantly being able to counter that, and you should be able to increase your volumes and you should be able to increase your supply also, right? So rival भी important है और वो भी important है. Moreover, a growing economy के अंदर usually the uh, demand shift may be driven out only by price. What? Moreover, in a growing economy, demand shifts may be driven not only by price, but also by changes in consumers' taste and income and all of the other things. So XCD helps business to track all of that, or फिर उनके decisions can have an impact on you. So you want to factor those in also. So in contrast, while PES remains important essentially, especially to ensure that the business can meet increasing demand, it is often limited by physical or logical constraints. मेरे ख्याल में बैकबोन इज योर पीईएस. यू हैव टू स्पेंड टाइम, क्योंकि अगर आप सब्स्टिट्यूट्स और कॉम्प्लीमेंट्स को भी डील करने जाओ and you want to make a strategy, you should have a very fluid supply. You got to spend time or and money and you need to increase that. So मेरी नजर में PES is much more important एक growing economy के अंदर, because growing economy के अंदर to capture the market, your supply capacity should be reasonable. Do you follow? So this is how this would be answered. फिर उसके बाद आ जाते हैं जरा question number 3. I'll just very quickly skim through it. I have a feeling that I've done this before. So with the help of examples, explain the difference between free good and public good. पहले 3 मार्क आराम से उठा सकते हो unless you make a big mess. फ्री गुड के अंदर हम कई दफा बात कर चुके हैं that you have to talk about no opportunity cost, no price is paid. An example could be कुछ standard examples आप रख लें, and it could be something like fresh air ज्यादातर यूज होता है, right? Okay. Sunlight और ये भी acceptable है. फिर when you're writing about public good, it is mandatory for you to talk about non-excludable, non-rivalry, explaining these terms along with street light is usually the examples that we want to write. Let's not complicate stuff. Now we want to consider the view that public goods can never be provided. So we're going to write about the whole free rider problem that you have, because the private sector is all about the market economy, which is owned by the private sector, is all about profit. And free rider problem aa jata hai because of the non-excludability. And since you cannot charge who's not paying for it, the private sector has no ability to profit from it. they can only be provided in a case where market economy के अंदर गवर्नमेंट जो है टैक्स रेवेन्यू के थ्रू प्राइवेट सेक्टर को किसी तरह से फंड कर ले। तो दैट इज द ओनली केस जिसके अंदर ये मैं नेवर को काउंटर कर रहा हूँ फॉर माय एनालिसिस। एंड देन आई वांट टू राइट माय फाइनल इवैल्यूएशन फॉर दिस, राइट? आई थिंक दिस इज हाउ दे गोना बी डूइंग दिस आल्सो, राइट? सो एनालिसिस के अंदर same thing that we've talked about, that is perfect, 3 marks you get for that. Explanation of the characteristics with the free rider ka problem, uh, would not supply them, therefore they must be provided by the government. And then your final evaluation, where you might want to consider, okay, so they are bringing in the idea of a quasi or a semi-public good, जिस केस के अंदर, बाय द वे, इफ यू नो, हम हमेशा quasi में क्या कहते हैं कि a person, it is maybe like non-excludable, but it is rivalry, or it is excludable, but it is non-rivalry. It has one of the two characteristics which makes it uh, sort of a semi-public. So it is generally true that pure public goods such as national defense or lighthouse cannot be provided effectively in a free market without government intervention, because the market cannot solve the free rider problem on its own. However, some goods are quasi-public and they exhibit some but not all characteristics of public good. For example, a toll road. Toll road excludable हो सकते हैं, but it is non-rivalry, and so इसके अंदर exclusion हो सकती है. So, in conclusion, while pure public goods are unlikely to be provided, you can have जहाँ पे एक quasi public हो जाए, या जहाँ पे there is might be a slight possibility of charging or restricting, तो वहाँ पर price can be charged. So along that line is what they want us to sort of like answer this question. So हो सकता है that you do get the mark. I've sort of like suggested the question and answer. You do take a look at this, but I think it's one of those simple ones that we have talked about it over the year. Plenty of time. Okay, G. Now, coming on to the next part, the provision of merit and demerit goods differ from the provision of other private goods. Assess the view that the consequence of imperfect information are more serious in a market economy than in a mixed economy. तो भाई आपको पता होना चाहिए कि इस क्वेश्चन के अंदर एक तो यू शुड ऑलरेडी हैव, जैसे ही क्वेश्चन पढ़ा, मेरिट और डीमेरिट और ये टर्मिनोलॉजीज आप पढ़ते हैं, फौरन फौरन से आपके दिमाग के अंदर इसके इश्यूज आने चाहिए। आपको पता है मेरिट और डीमेरिट में इशू क्या है? मेरिट गुड्स आर अंडर प्रोवाइडेड, डीमेरिट गुड्स आर ओवर प्रोवाइडेड, राइट? एंड दोनों की डेफिनेशन में हम हमेशा बोलते हैं ड्यू टू इंफॉर्मेशन फेलियर, right? So they're saying assess the view that the consequence of imperfect information are more serious in a market economy than in a mix. मैं तो चाहूंगा थोड़ा सा मार्केट और मिक्स को भी छोटा सा डिफाइन कर लिया जाए। ठीक है कि जहां मार्केट के अंदर डिमांड एंड सप्लाई के थ्रू डिस्कशन होता है, और मिक्स के अंदर जो है प्राइवेट और पब्लिक दोनों होता है। प्राइवेट हैज अ फ्री हैंड टू यूज डिमांड एंड सप्लाई एंड एक्सक्लूडेबिलिटी एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट, बट जहां मार्केट फेल होती है वहां पे वी वुड लाइक द गवर्नमेंट टू इंटरवीन। तो माय फर्स्ट पैराग्राफ शुड बी समथिंग अबाउट a little bit of these terminology, but maybe you might get a mark for it or not, but maybe let's say level 1 मिल जाएगा। But what I'm really looking into is you talking about that how merit goods in a private sector, in a market economy, which uses the demand and the supply, will underproduce the goods because of the information failure, and because of the profit can be only made by the people who are paying for it and ignoring the externalities. Demerit may the same thing with overproduction, right? And because there's more profit to be made and they care less about the environment and people's harm, right? So जो imperfect information hai, I would like to first suggest what do we mean by this imperfect information. It is about people not realizing the true benefit of the merit goods or the true cost of the demerit goods, and because of which they underproduce or underconsume and overproduce and overconsume, right? So एक तरफ जहां मार्केट में ये प्रॉब्लम आती है, we want to suggest that mixed economy is sort of like going to deal with this problem. So if I look at the marking scheme, I want you to see the marking scheme before we I show you the sample. An analysis of how private goods, which includes merit and demerits, are produced through demand and supply mechanism. That will be dealt with जब हम बात करेंगे कैसे market economy works. फिर इंफॉर्मेशन फेलियर या इम्परफेक्ट इंफॉर्मेशन की वजह से कैसे मेरिट और डीमेरिट के अंदर अंडर और ओवर कंजम्पशन का प्रॉब्लम आएगा. We've talked about that also. Then we're going to suggest an explanation of how this is likely to lead to different methods of allocation for both merit and demerit in the case of, nahi, somehow something else. An explanation of how this is likely to lead different methods of allocation for both merit and demerit goods than for other private goods. Oh, this is what I missed. That's bad. Basically, this is what happens. You read some things and you just completely forget. The question now it reminds me that the question is saying how the provision will be different for merit and demerit as compared to other private goods. In my discussion, sort of, I'm not doing that. I might have done it a little bit in terms of कि वहाँ demand and supply की basis के ऊपर allocation होती है. I think in a way I was, but not specifically. कि मेरिट और डीमेरिट के अंदर देर इज एन अंडर एंड ओवर एलोकेशन का प्रॉब्लम, बट अदर प्राइवेट गुड्स जिसमें ये इशू नहीं होता, वहाँ जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर है वो बिल्कुल परफेक्टली इकोनॉमी के अंदर क्वांटिटीज प्रोड्यूस करेगा एट फेवरेबल प्राइसेस, राइट. सारा जो प्रॉब्लम है वो मेरिट और डीमेरिट में होता है जहाँ मार्केट फेलियर हैपेंस, राइट. So analysis should consider the consequence of imperfect information in both markets and a mix for the provision of merit and demerit compared to the other private goods. Answer which do not compare the provision of merit and demerit goods in both the market and mix cannot get more than level 2. I think we did that. कि mixed में क्या होगा और market में क्या होगा. Um, with how the government will intervene in the mix and they will try to overcome that issue, or at least they'll try to. I think we did sort of level 2 below level. And then for your evaluation, you are talking about how the government needs to step in ताकि वो उस information failure का मसला हल करे. But remember, ज़रूरी नहीं है कि even government stepping in will solve the problem of the information failure. Even government might fail. Why? Because they did a good job with the providing of information and stuff. So they might lack over there. ठीक. So I've suggested an answer here. Let's take a look at that for a second. Let me zoom in. Okay. Sorry, there's slight lag. So in an economy, private goods are generally allocated through demand and supply forces. Consumers can express their willingness to buy goods and services, and producer makes reasonable profit. Private goods are excludable in rivalry. Uh, marking scheme में इसके marks नहीं है, but I've told you कि please थोड़ी बहुत terminologies को जरूर explain किया करो, especially if they've not been talked about. जैसे पिछला क्वेश्चन जो था that was about free good and public, यहाँ पे private good है, so maybe it would not harm you if you talk about excludability and rivalry for a second. Merit goods and demerit goods की भी definition is not a bad idea. Overconsumed due to information failure, underconsumed due to information failure. एंड देन मार्केट इकोनॉमी के अंदर इम्परफेक्ट इंफॉर्मेशन होती है बिकॉज उनका काम प्रॉफिट है नॉट सोशल वेलफेयर, तो इसी वजह से दे माइट अंडर प्रोड्यूस द गुड्स। बिल्कुल होता है। मिक्स्ड इकोनॉमी के अंदर इंटरवेंशन हो सकती है और वो चीज़ें सब्सिडीज के थ्रू या लोअर टैक्सेशन के थ्रू या डीमेरिट पे हायर टैक्सेशन के थ्रू यू माइट try to improve the quantity for merit and reduce the quantity for demerit to reach a socially optimal level. So without such intervention, pure markets will have an under or an over allocation problem. Then your evaluation, जिसके अंदर you might suggest that जो imperfect information का problem है वो ज़्यादा serious है market economy में as compared to mix, because market के अंदर failures को deal करने का कोई हल नहीं है। It benefits out of the information failure of the people. Mixed के अंदर government tries to fix that through whatever means they have in hand. Sometimes they do a good job, sometimes they might not do a good job, and so that is how it would work. ये आपका एक overall structure होना चाहिए इसका, and that is how we are going to answer this. ठीक है, I think it's a reasonably easy question. Again, it's more about how you answer these questions, um, right? So in 4A, you have a question, explain the difference between the terms of trade and the balance of trade in goods. खास तौर पे, I don't know why they've said this, but चलो, balance of trade and goods, they've completely eliminated the services. Usually हम trade balance लिखते हैं, but over here कोई वजह ही होगी, ठीक है? एक्सप्लेन द डिफरेंस। पहली बात, आपने एक्सप्लेन मुझे क्या करना है, टर्म्स ऑफ ट्रेड क्या होता है। भाई टर्म्स ऑफ ट्रेड क्या होता है? टर्म्स ऑफ ट्रेड बेसिकली एक प्राइस रेशो, एक रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन द प्राइस ऑफ एक्सपोर्ट एंड प्राइस ऑफ इंपोर्ट होता है। तो इट्स अ प्राइस रेशियो ऑफ एक्सपोर्ट एंड इंपोर्ट। डेफिनेशन के लिए ये काफी है, लेकिन मैं फर्दर इसको एलैबोरेट करता हूँ किस तरह से। दैट इट बेसिकली टेल्स मी दैट हाउ मच imports can be bought from one unit of export। मैं ये भी बता सकता हूं कि इसका जो फॉर्मूला है वो है प्राइस इंडेक्स ऑफ एक्सपोर्ट divided by price index of import into 100. So many things I can tell you about this, but the key thing for the mark will be this, that is the price ratio. This हमेशा matters। फिर मैं ट्रेड इन गुड्स बता दूंगा। भाई ट्रेड इन गुड्स इज बेसिकली पार्ट ऑफ करंट अकाउंट, जिसके अंदर आप बेसिकली export revenue minus import expenditure. Do you see the words that I'm using? I'm not saying export minus import. I'm saying export का जो revenue है minus import पे जो expenditure है, that is what is measured over here. They're not asking me कि surplus है क्या deficit है. I'll go on a limb and I might even suggest कि भाई ये trade in goods का surplus under what circumstance आएगा और deficit under what circumstance आएगा. Extra, general information show off करने के लिए थोड़ा सा। Alright, उसके बाद हम बढ़ते हैं। Consider whether an economy should be more concerned about the terms of trade than its balance of trade in goods. Now this is where it gets interesting, because I would want to know कि अगर मेरा terms of are they saying rise or fall, whether should be more concerned about its terms of trade than its balance of payment. So it's an open-ended, okay? Usually we want your terms of trade to go favorable, all right? आपको पता है कि आपका जो टर्म्स ऑफ ट्रेड है वो तो प्राइस ऑफ एक्सपोर्ट और प्राइस ऑफ इंपोर्ट पे डिपेंडेंट है। तो अगर आपका टर्म ऑफ ट्रेड ऊपर जा रहा है बिकॉज ऑफ से इन्फ्लेशन, राइट, और इन्फ्लेशन भी कौन सी वाली, कॉस्ट पुश, क्योंकि देखो दोनों में फर्क आ जाता है। खास तौर पे कॉस्ट पुश इन्फ्लेशन, अगर मैं कॉस्ट पुश इन्फ्लेशन की बात करूं तो माय प्राइस ऑफ एक्सपोर्ट विल गो अप, right? And that will cause my term of trade to worsen. But at the same time, I want to remember कि देखें जी, इसकी वजह से जो मेरा एक्सपोर्ट का वॉल्यूम है वो भी गिरेगा, और जो वैल्यू है, जो मेरा एक्सपोर्ट रेवेन्यू है, that is going to fall. So this seems like a problem for me. Do you understand? It is a problem issue. या अगर मेरा टर्म ऑफ ट्रेड is basically changing because of my product competitiveness, like my product competitiveness is going up, right? Because मेरा product जो है, मैंने sophisticated innovative product बना रहा हूँ, तो उसके लिए I can charge a higher price, right? So if I'm making a good product, a more innovative product, वो मेरा ट्रेड एंड गुड बैलेंस के लिए भी अच्छा है, और वो मेरा टर्म्स ऑफ ट्रेड के लिए भी अच्छा है, क्योंकि मैं एक बहुत अच्छा वैल्यू का प्रोडक्ट बना रहा हूँ। लेकिन अगर कोई competitiveness का इशू आ रहा है where my prices are going up because I'm not able to compete so well, my terms of trade will be going above, but I have some structural problem that I cannot compete with my fellow trading competitors. Now that's bad for terms of trade. So just to clarify, terms of trade is only looking at the price, and it can be going up because of inflation, which might hurt your trade balance, which looks at the terms of trade. And obviously elasticity has some role to play in it also. ठीक है जी। फिर आपका discussion can also go towards your other macroeconomic objective. For example, your terms of trade going up while your trade balance having an impact on AD, because CIG X minus M. If X minus M changes, it affects your AD. And when AD gets affected, we studied your entire macroeconomic equilibrium sort of changes. And then there's lots of things to write about that. Okay. So take a look at a little suggested essay for this one. Terms of trade with the formula मैं बता देता हूँ. Sorry, not PET. Terms of trade is price index वाला formula लिखा करो of export. Just price of export over price of import is not correct. Terms of trade के अंदर आप index के साथ work करते हो, ठीक है? Into 100, make sure you write all of that. So based on what we've just talked about, so these should be easy 3 marks to pick. फिर उसके बाद हम बात कर रहे हैं oh my bad. Changes in the term of trade can have significant effects on the economy. अगर terms of trade में जो increase आता है वो increase आता है like I mentioned before, price of export बढ़ने से या price of import गिरने से और relativity की वजह से, तो डेफिनेटली आपकी एक्सपोर्ट को डिफरेंसेस आएगा, बट अगेन दैट कैन कम एज अ रिजल्ट ऑफ यू लूजिंग योर इंटरनेशनल competitiveness. Why? Because your prices have gone up too much and your exports are basically getting hurt. Similarly, अगर कंट्री का बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट भी अच्छा है, बिकॉज इफ यू हैव अ सरप्लस, आपका एडी बढ़ेगा, उससे इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ और एम्प्लॉयमेंट भी आएगी, लेकिन अगर आपके पास एक परसिस्टेंट डेफिसिट है तो दैट इज अ प्रॉब्लमेटिक सिचुएशन, क्योंकि आपके ऊपर फॉरेन डेट चढ़ेगा और आपकी करेंसी वीक हो जाएगी। और उससे आपके मुल्क में इन्फ्लेशन भी आ सकती है। एंड देन योर फाइनल सॉर्ट ऑफ लाइक एन इवैल्यूएटिव स्टेटमेंट ऑन दिस कि विल इट बी रियली बैड और नॉट। तो आप बात कर सकते हो ऑन द टाइप ऑफ द प्रोडक्ट यूर सेलिंग, इलास्टिक इन इलास्टिक की पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से बात कर सकते हो, ओपन और क्लोज्ड इकोनॉमी के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द इकोनॉमी के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से डेफिनेटली तुम बात कर सकते हो कि जो प्रोडक्ट तुम बना रहे हो। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लेट मी गिव यू एन एग्जाम्पल। USA feels that US can beat China in the whole situation of the trade war because they are putting tariffs on their low value products, and China is putting tariffs on American high value products. अब इसमें elasticity also comes into play. Now, Americans, what they're importing from China, अगर वो highly inelastic products हैं, तो tariff is going to really hurt the Chinese economy. That's what they're hoping for, right? लेकिन अगर वो goods elastic हो जाते हैं, तो टैरिफ लगाने से कोई खास प्राइस में इंक्रीज नहीं आएगा और क्वांटिटी में बहुत बड़ा ड्रॉप आएगा। दैट्स गोना अगेन हर्ट चाइना मोर। Sorry, first inelastic के केस में the Chinese would benefit, but the government is going to get a lot of money, right, tariffs के through. um, इसके अलावा your discussion can also be in the case of, I don't know, अगर तुम, you might have come across Marshall Lerner's condition, but it's not part of your course, mostly to do with the elasticity. ठीक है, so उसके point of view से तुम रखो and you'll be fine in that case, right? So that's how you are going to be writing this question. What should you be more concerned with? मेरी नजर के अंदर terms of trade से ज़्यादा your concern should be with the balance of trade in goods, because it has an impact on your revenues and aggregate demand, and that can be a serious problem. फिर उसके बाद हम आगे बढ़ते हैं and we look at question number 4B. इसके अंदर हमारे पास question is assess whether a rise or fall in the terms of trade will benefit the macroeconomic performance of an open economy that is heavily dependent on international trade. So इसके अंदर almost like pretty much it's very similar to the first one that I've discussed. लेकिन इसके अंदर हम क्या कर रहे हैं? A fall here, because उन्होंने बोला rise or a fall, so you have to take one side and you have to discuss कि टर्म ऑफ ट्रेड आप कर चुके हो, कुछ मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक परफॉर्मेंस की बात कर लो ओपन इकोनॉमी को, थोड़ा सा नॉलेज अंडरस्टैंडिंग के लिए समझा दो दैट वी टॉकिंग अबाउट प्राइस स्टेबिलिटी, वी टॉकिंग अबाउट एम्प्लॉयमेंट, वी टॉकिंग अबाउट द करंट अकाउंट बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट। ठीक है, अगर आपका टर्म ऑफ ट्रेड राइज कर रहा है बिकॉज ऑफ राइजिंग प्राइसेस, उससे इलास्टिसिटी की बेसिस के ऊपर इट इज क्वाइट पॉसिबल कि योर एक्सपोर्ट रेवेन्यूज माइट फॉल, और उससे एक्सपोर्ट रेवेन्यूज में जब ड्रॉप आएगा तो आपके एडी कर्व के अंदर शिफ्ट आएंगे। तो दिस वन मोर ऑन दैट साइड ऑनेस्टली। my bad. I see a lot of resemblance in the first and the second question. In fact, there's a very thin line in the two. Right. Yeah, so from the rising point of view, I need to go back and see exactly what is the difference between the two. Have I misunderstood the question? Yeah, it's very similar questions actually. Right, so no, we're going to stick with that. So a rise in the terms of trade can happen because of higher prices for exports and lower prices for imports. So इसके पीछे कुछ वजूहात हो सकती हैं. लेकिन if your term of trade is increasing, it really depends on the elasticity for your product. Remember that agar if your country is going through inflation and the product that you're selling, uski, it's an inelastic good. So even through terms of trade might be rising because of price of export, the thing is that you will continue to sell a lot of quantity and you will make good revenues on this, right? तो उस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से यू विल कंटिन्यू टू मेक गुड मनी. और फिर जब आपका एक्सपोर्ट बढ़ेगा तो योर एंटायर एडी इज गोना गो अप एंड दैट विल कॉज योर इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ टू राइज एंड योर एम्प्लॉयमेंट टू राइज. सो दैट्स अ गुड थिंग एंड प्लस अगर आपका एक्सपोर्ट भी बढ़ रहा है तो दैट मीन्स योर करंट अकाउंट इज गोइंग टू इम्प्रूव एज वेल. सो ऑल गुड थिंग्स ओवर हियर. लेकिन अगर आपकी इलास्टिसिटी इज greater than one, that means elastic and your price goes up, right? So agar price ऊपर जाएगी तो then the entire thing is going to start collapsing because your export revenues are going to start falling down and then that's going to have a chain reaction. If there is a fall, then obviously term of trade fall कर रहा है because the price of export is going down and you can suggest something. Answers which do not refer to the heavy dependence on international trade. Okay, so यहाँ पे लेवल 3 के लिए यू मस्ट टॉक अबाउट कि अगर एक कंट्री है जो बहुत ज्यादा ट्रेड पे रिलाई करता है तो दिस इज वेयर द कनेक्शन विल बी. कि जब इसकी प्राइस में चेंज आएगा और इसके एक्सपोर्ट में चेंज आएगा वो CIGX-M पे कितना इम्पैक्ट लाएगा डिपेंड्स ऑन हाउ मच डिपेंडेंस दे हैव ऑन इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड. तो सिंस दे हैव अ लॉट ऑफ डिपेंडेंस तो एडी पे बहुत बड़ा इम्पैक्ट आएगा एंड सो द इफेक्ट विल बी अ लॉट मोर ऑन द ऑल. Answer which only refers to a rise or fall in the terms of trade cannot gain more than level 2. So that means you have to talk about rise and you have to talk about the fall. That's crazy. At least one negative effect in addition to positive, chalo, that we already know of, either for a rise or fall in terms, should be considered within the analysis to gain lower three. All right, so this is what's going on. You side one sided लिखो rise. ठीक है और उसका पॉजिटिव नेगेटिव दे दो तो तुमको विल गिव यू 6. ओके लेवल 3 में कंसिडर होगा लेकिन 6. राइज एंड फॉल दोनों लिखो लेकिन सिर्फ पॉजिटिव लिखो अगेन लेवल 2. काउंटर आर्ग्यू करना लाजिम है फॉर यू टू हैव अ लेवल 3 आंसर. पॉजिटिव नेगेटिव लिखो एंड फायदा एंड नुकसान लिखो. यू गेट फुल लेवल 3 हायर साइड. राइट सो I've told you, please answer every part. इधर और की वजह से I sort of like would have lost marks. You should not. Then finally, evaluation. They are using the term martial learners, but बच्चे are not required to know that. But maybe you, if you do write about it, you will be rewarded. By the way, martial learners और J का समझना ही है तो जाके तुम देख सकते हो. It is there. It has been discussed in my videos, previous videos, right? So your overall evaluation should be about the fact कि a rise or the fall जो है it will have an impact on the macroeconomic policies for an open economy that is heavily dependent on international trade. But more importantly, it is about the cause, why it is rising and why is it falling, and how it impacts the exports and the import revenues. And that basically has an impact on the macroeconomic objectives. So मेन डिस्कशन वो ये लास्ट चीज और उसका एक फाइनल इवैल्यूएटिव स्टेटमेंट आपने करना है. Taking you to the last questions which I've talked about, कि देखें जी majority of the kids will be doing this. A very overwhelming kids will be doing it. आसान सा question है. So I'll just walk you through it. You must have done this over the year while in your class or your midterms or your tests or somewhere, and even in the mock. With the help of a diagram or diagrams, explain one reason for an increase in AD and one reason for an increase in AS. Reason matters. Diagram के साथ reason matters. Please make a habit. Marks किसी भी चीज में मिल सकते हैं. I want to explain every single thing possible. ADAS को मैं समझाना चाहूंगा. एक एक रीजन दोनों के मैं परफेक्टली समझाना चाहूंगा. और डायग्राम के अंदर या डायग्राम्स के अंदर what the examiner is really looking at is तुम x और y axis पे क्या लिखते हो. मैं लिखता हूँ real output and price level. You don't write price level, you're in trouble. You write aggregate demand, you write aggregate supply. You give it an equilibrium. या तो AD इंक्रीज करो या AS इंक्रीज करो. दोनों डायग्राम्स अगर एक ही में बना लो, we have no issues whatsoever as long as you are doing that. ठीक हो गया. So even if you look at the marking scheme, what do they want? AD की definition along ये flash लगा हुआ है. That means this might be, might not be. I always tell you AD को define करो तो CIGX minus M जरूर लिखा करो. Aggregate supply एक सिर्फ ADAS का diagram with correct labels. You write price instead of price level. I take away this mark. AD का shift, AS का shift और उसके reason, और बल्कि AD का शिफ्ट और AS के शिफ्ट दोनों का एक ही मार्क मिलेगा. एंड द रिजल्टिंग इम्पैक्ट ऑन द प्राइस लेवल. तो मैंने जो है एक यहाँ पे दोनों के शिफ्ट को दिखा के P1 करके Y1 करके ओरिजिनल इक्विलिब्रियम E0 से E1 करके आई क्लोज दिस. ओके. इट डजेंट मैटर किसका तुम बड़ा शिफ्ट करोगे किसका छोटा शिफ्ट करोगे, because that is one of the discussion that you will do for the evaluation. because evaluation के अंदर आपने डिस्कस करना है कि AD के बढ़ने से क्या इन्फ्लेशन हमेशा होगी. तो आई विल से भाई AD के बढ़ने से इन्फ्लेशन होगी कि नहीं होगी डिपेंड्स ऑन AD और AS के साइज ऑफ द शिफ्ट. अगर AD का शिफ्ट ज्यादा बड़ा है एज कंपेयर टू AS तो फिर इन्फ्लेशन होगी. इक्वल है तो इन्फ्लेशन नहीं होगी. AS का शिफ्ट ज्यादा बड़ा है तो इन्फ्लेशन नहीं, गिर जाएगी. इनफैक्ट डिफ्लेशन हो जाएगी. So that's how I'm going to mark that about the relative change of it. चाहते हो तो LRAS के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से भी लिख सकते हो. आई होप यू रिमेम्बर दी LRAS वाला डिस्कशन we've done, जहाँ पे हम लिखते हैं कि भाई ये डिपेंड्स कि आप LRAS के कौन से हिस्से के ऊपर हो. राइट. अगर आप इधर हो और AD बढ़ता है तो इन्फ्लेशन विल नॉट हैपन. अगर आप फुल पोटेंशियल पे हैं तो फिर इट विल हैपन. राइट. सो वी टॉक्ड अबाउट दिस a lot of times in the past. Okay जी. फिर उसके बाद the next question is about assess whether the internal effects of inflation are more serious. This is my evaluation. External effects ज़्यादा हैं या internal effects ज़्यादा serious हैं. तो internal के अंदर please remember we have a series of internal. I think मेरे पास ऐसे इसमें लिखे हुए हैं. या इसको याद कर लो, रटा कर लो. ये पास्ट में ये क्वेश्चन बहुत आता था लेकिन अभी रिसेंट में भी आ गया है. चलो देखें जी. सबसे पहले तो इन्फ्लेशन क्या होती है, लेट्स डिफाइन दैट. फिर इंटरनल क्या होते हैं. इंटरनल आर टॉकिंग अबाउट द डोमेस्टिक फैक्टर्स जो विद इन योर इकोनॉमी इश्यूज होते हैं. जब आपकी कंट्री के अंदर इन्फ्लेशन है, और बाय द वे द क्वेश्चन इज नॉट सेइंग high inflation, low inflation, it's just saying inflation. So that would be something that you may want to consider when talking about कितना बड़ा या कितना कम इम्पैक्ट आएगा. इनकम डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन इज टॉकिंग अबाउट, यू रिमेंबर दोस फिक्स्ड वर्सेस फ्लेक्सिबल इनकम अर्नर्स. फिक्स्ड इनकम जो पेंशनर्स होते हैं, जो सेवर्स होते हैं, they're basically getting a fixed amount of money. Now if inflation is higher than that, they're losing. Menu cost is important, shoe leather cost is important. I've talked about it. When your country is going through inflation, you have to continuously change your prices. That's not very popular with your customer. And plus, you have to spend a lot on your menus and catalogs and marketing and websites and all of that. True leather is when there is inflation, your investors and consumers have to go and find a better earning investment asset, which takes time and effort. इसको आप search cost कहते हैं. एंड देन अगेन इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से इकोनॉमी में अनसर्टेनिटी हो जाती है, खासतौर पे बहुत हाई इन्फ्लेशन के क्या प्राइस चार्ज करनी चाहिए. एंड देन योर करेंसी रियली लूजेस इट्स वैल्यू, राइट? हाउएवर, moderate inflation can also be a sign of economic growth. You see, I'm doing a counter argument that internal maybe inflation might not have a very bad impact. I want to make a counter. A small counter like this is good enough. कि अगर mild inflation and if it's happening because of rising demand for your goods and services, that's a good thing, you know. So हम ज्यादातर कहते हैं rapid accelerating and high inflation is bad, but creeping is always desirable. एक्सटर्नल के केस के अंदर एक्सटर्नल के केस के अंदर we're talking about that our country is going through inflation, but against the foreign competition, जो आपके competing partners हैं, they're not getting hurt by that because they are efficient. So you are losing your competitiveness and you're losing your export revenue. Imports might be rising, your current account is worsening, that puts pressure on your currency, it weakens your currency. Then आपकी currency की internal और external value दोनों खराब होती है. Investors turn away, there's uncertainty and all, right? लेकिन on the other hand, अगर आपका product inelastic है, now this is me making the counter argument. If your product is inelastic, it will actually boost your export revenue and that can actually work in your favor. So that can be a good thing also. You understand what we're doing here? There's not much terminology to discuss in this question. So you're talking about internal, how it will have an effect, negative effect, and then you counter it. External, then you counter it. And then you create scenarios and make your evaluative statements, right? So your evaluative statements is obviously लाइक जो मैं सीरियसनेस की यहाँ पे बात कर रहे हैं हम, कि भाई अब क्या बात कर रहे हैं. हमारे जो क्वेश्चन है उसके अंदर we can argue it depends on the openness of the economy, right? If you're going through inflation and एक open economy है तो आपका ट्रेड इज गोना गेट अफेक्टेड और ट्रेड की वजह से आपकी लोकल डिमांड विल अफेक्टेड एंड आपका उसका लोकल इकोनॉमी पे इम्पैक्ट आएगा. उसका आपका एक्सचेंज रेट पे ज्यादा बड़ा सीवियर इम्पैक्ट आएगा. बट इफ यू हैव अ क्लोज्ड इकोनॉमी, नॉट क्लोज बट रिलेटिवली लेस ओपन इकोनॉमी, तो आपका एक्सचेंज रेट और बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट पे इतना मेजर नहीं आएगा बिकॉज यू सेल इट. जैसे पाकिस्तान जो भी गुड्स बनाता है वो हार्डली एक्सपोर्ट करता है, मेजोरिटी लोकल इकोनॉमी में कंज्यूम हो जाता है उसका, राइट? तो इसका कोई इंटरनेशनल एस्पेक्ट पे कोई बहुत ज्यादा इम्पैक्ट नहीं आएगा. मोस्ट ऑफ द इम्पैक्ट इज गोइंग टू बी बोर्न बाय द लोकल इकोनॉमी एंड दैट वुड बी अनफॉर्चुनेटली अ बैड थिंग, राइट? So again, you can talk in terms of the short run and the long run side of it, कि उसका इकोनॉमी के ऊपर कितना मेजर इम्पैक्ट आ सकता है. इंटरनल है तो यू कैन डू एक्सपेंशनरी फिस्कल मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी एंड ट्राई टू सॉल्व इट. बट इंटरनेशनल कॉन्फिडेंस अगर डैमेज हो जाता है बिकॉज ऑफ द स्ट्रक्चरल इश्यूज, then that is very difficult to regain. So yeah, आपकी short run, long run के अंदर this is what you can talk about also, right? So मेरी नजर के अंदर this is how you can go about this. And it would be an important discussion to be made.